Okay, I just have a brief presentation, and then we'll move on to the next parts of the more demonstration of the contributing data. So just a brief overview. As you're probably aware, FaceBase has a very broad collection of data. So we have everything from RNA-seq, even older microarray data, ChIP-seq experiments, enhancer profiling data, GWAS data. We have facial scans on human subjects. So that's photogrammetry kind of data. We have CT scans and even MR scans on animal models, microscopy data. So it's a very broad collection of data. So we're really open to very broad types of data and experiments that are being performed. What's common between them is that they all concern some aspect of craniofacial, dental, perhaps even oral related data, development, as well as disease or dysmorphology data. So there's a common theme, but it's very broad in terms of what kind of data that we would provide and accept from the community. Something I mentioned before in the first session is that we treat data as a first-class research product. And we know that the field overall, just throughout the NIH, has grown a lot over the past decade plus in terms of recognizing data as a critical part of the scholarly process. It's really the underlying evidence to support the claims of a publication. And increasingly, an understanding is developing throughout the community that this is an important part, a critical part of backing up claims that are being published. And of course, the publishers are increasingly recognizing that. And then the funding community as well, the NIH in particular, as well as other funding bodies, have adopted various forms of data sharing requirements. And this is increasing as we go forward. And so, data is really a critical part of the research output, and we want to provide the best possible home for craniofacial, oral, dental data. And in FaceBase, we also want to provide a good level of description of that data. So it's not just a zip file with a bundle of images in it, but it's actually, as I described before, and as we've seen before in the demo, there's some structured information. It's really not a large amount, but it's just enough so that we know the basic biological characteristics for each item of data and what experiment, and then we can find the protocol that produced it. So all of the things that I think we would agree are necessary for really understanding and appreciating the role of that data in the research. So when you have data that you think would be of interest to FaceBase, the process begins on the FaceBase website. Under the navbar menu, there is a link item for submit. So under there, it will guide you through to a form where you begin by essentially introducing your data to us. So this is a brief overview describing your data. So in the case of data that comes from human subjects, we would ask that that you have just make sure basic things are covered, like that you have an IRB approval to collect and share the data, that the data are properly consented. And then you give a little overview of what is the type of data you're sharing and your thoughts on the relevance to FaceBase. And then we review it with the overall FaceBase steering committee. That includes our program staff as well. And we typically aim to have a response back within 2 weeks' time. Okay, and then upon approval, we begin you begin really the data submission process. So Alejandro is going to provide a demonstration of this, But just to give an overview, it typically begins with a tutorial. And actually, this is very much what Alejandro is going to do, is very much the content of that tutorial. And this is typically done one-on-one, so it's very appropriate at this time. And then from there, the next step in the process that you see there is describe experiments and biosamples, and above it, a screenshot of online forms. So most of the things in FaceBase, so we are described by carefully curated terms that have been standardized throughout the NIH community. A lot of them are available on the NCBI, that's the National Center for Bioinformatics, and they catalog terms so that basically people across NIH can describe their data and their experiments and their the information in their papers with terms that we all understand the meaning of. Now FaceBase provides an easy way to annotate your data. We simplify it all down into forms that have drop downs. So you just pick a term from the drop down in the form for things like the name of the gene, the mouse strain. We have all the strains that come from MGI. That's not relevant to human data, but so you would have things like anatomy and phenotype. So we also have syndromes that come from the Mondo disease ontology. So we simplify it all down to just essentially picking terms from dropdowns to describe the biological characteristics in your study. Same thing for experiments and so on. And then the next step is uploading data files. We have a desktop application that you basically point at the directory that you have your files, and it uploads them. We have a little different process for human subjects data, where Alejandro is a bit more hands-on with that, because we have to have another layer of security on top of the upload. Then we have some automated steps and some of our own review for quality control. So part of that is automated. Some of it is also comes from a small team of us who review all new data sets for the curation quality. We provide feedback back to the contributor. And then you'll notice I have a box in there for cite the data set. So a lot of times data are contributed in the course of preparing a manuscript. And we would encourage you, again, per the leading publishers' guidelines as well, to include official references to your data sets. And so we provide those digital object identifiers and the recommendations and examples on how to cite your data. So we give you those examples, and so we encourage you to cite your own data sets in your manuscripts as you're preparing them. And then lastly, when everything is ready, we release them. And you'll also notice there's an option to embargo a data set to have it timed with the publication. So you can have it released along with the anticipated publication date of your article. So that's kind of a high-level overview of the steps to actually submitting data. And it's really just, most of the effort is just on the left-hand side there, filling out some description of the biological characteristics and the experiment details, and then uploading the data. And then the rest is pretty much the quality control and citing your data. Okay, so again, mentioning just citing, I wanted to revisit this slide again and just reiterate the point that all data sets are citable, that those citations include the digital object identifier. That is a link that is globally unique. It is persistent and maintained by a third-party registration service. So it will outlast FaceBase even. Not that we're going anywhere, but that it's just another layer of persistence, and make sure that it's valid for a very long time. These are versioned. They can be included, of course, in publications. And this is all available for all of your individual data sets. So just looking at what an actual data set looks like on FaceBase, just zooming in on it a bit here. So at the on the right-hand side, we have a kind of a large thumbnail, if you will, of what an overall data set page looks like. And what we're calling out here in this slide is the top portion, that is the top level description of that data set. So it begins with the title on top, and then it has the official identifiers in FaceBase, and then attribution information, which includes the title of your project, which is oftentimes a particular study or investigation, something that you might have an abstract to describe it overall. And we also have an entry in our system for your project. And then the individual contributors, that includes the PIs, and anyone who was actively working on the data set can be listed here. And then you'll notice there are protocols, and then we get down to additional, something we call out as cross-references. So sometimes there are parts of the data that are in dbGaP, and you want to be able to reference that. So you can have some data in FaceBase, like images that wouldn't be collected by dbGaP, but you have data over in dbGaP, and you can reference that from FaceBase. All right, and then I mentioned before that we have this structure. So underneath that page, what's really driving all of that information is this structured data again that I showed in the previous session, but I'll just revisit here again. So all of the data are organized around, at the top middle there, begins with the project. So again, the group that contributed data could be a lab, a consortium, an individual, like R01 scale of investigation. Those typically produce not just one, but maybe multiple data sets. And those are particular collections of data. You know, there could be in an R01, maybe there was a first phase that looked at a particular age stage and then moved on to the next age stage. And those might be two different data sets, for example, and how they were collected, or the timeline of when the experiments were conducted, and then publications were made on them. Each of those data sets will describe certain amount of experiment details. It doesn't have to be a huge amount. We want to know things like the particular type of assay. You know, is it GWAS versus RNA-seq versus micro-CT, and so on. If there's a particular instrument used, we would also have room to describe that, to identify that, I should say. And then most importantly are really the protocol documents, which again, a lot of this information, it would be everything that you would normally have in the course of your investigation. And certainly when you're preparing a manuscript for publication, you would know all of these details. And then next come the biological characteristics of the biosamples. And then we have this extra box for replicate. That's really just grouping together. Okay, you had 3 control subjects, as well as 3 affected patients, for example. I mean, those could be in different groupings, control versus affected, and then data. And so these would be the images or other types of data records. And then for certain types of data, and this can apply for human as well as animal data. So for online visualization, for human data, we can support a certain amount of visualization for, in the case of like genome browser, track files are acceptable to have in the public for view, because there's no individual identifiable information. There's nothing that can really be reverse engineered to do that. There's also a certain amount of online visualization for GWAS data as well. We have that available for some of our GWAS data, a tool called the loci viewer. And then for animal subject data, we have a range of capabilities, which I demonstrated in the morning, from from the orthoslice viewer, from 3D volume visualization. We also have the surface models, and then high resolution image viewer, as well as the single cell browser and the genome browser. So just final thoughts before we get into the demonstration part of it. So we would say, just from experience, some of the strategies for successful, and by successful, no contributions have ended in failure. So there have been no failed contributions, but success in terms of making life easier on yourself is to review the metadata data guidelines early in the process of preparing a manuscript. So, preparing data for sharing online, as part of a publication or really anything else, requires some effort. So just like preparing a manuscript requires some effort, and preparing a publication doesn't happen in a day. Now, the steps for uploading data to FaceBase in themselves should not be difficult. The main effort is really organizing the information, knowing what genotype of a particular specimen for a particular image, and knowing that for your own data is really the largest part of the effort. But understanding the steps early and being part of the bootcamp is checking off box one, I would say, is getting familiar with the process early. We have the tutorial, which Alejandro will be doing next. And we're always happy to do that again. So let's say 6 months from now is really when you're ready to upload data. Alejandro will be happy to do a tutorial again with you and the rest of your team, or whoever might also be involved in it. And then also we encourage contributors to submit even part of a data set, maybe the first experiment, the first set of data, and then have us review it, just a quick check, and get back to you, because we can just spot anything where there might have been some confusion. And then we're always here and happy to help. Alejandro is the primary point of contact. We give out the help@facebase.org email address. That way Alejandro will receive that, but so will I, so will Chris, and others from the hub as well. And that way, if Alejandro is out or anything like that, others of us can get back and answer any questions. So with that, I will hand it over, for questions as well as for the next topic of discussion.
So just making sure if there's Marie, do you have any questions so far?
Mute myself. So it's always the same problem, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think it was pretty straightforward. Thank you, Rod. It was good. My only probably question, which will be answered after that, if we will contribute with some data and somebody is going to use them and use them in publication, how is it with authorship?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last bit of your question there.
Yeah. So Rob, if let's say we will contribute with certain amount of data, right? And then somebody is going to use them in their a project. How and then published the study. How is it with authorship?
Oh, okay. So So the policy on FaceBase is that anyone who uses data in their research needs to properly cite the data. So this comes back to the citation features in FaceBase. And so I'll just pop up this slide again. So it really comes down to what we provide in terms of being able to cite it. So it should be So a work, if you share something through FaceBase, so a couple things can happen, really. One is that someone sees the data, it's shared. The only restriction on them is that if they use the data in any study, they need to cite it. So it becomes a citation, just like you get a citation on a paper, you get a citation on your data. You also, I didn't actually mention this, I should have mentioned this, that all data sets can have a listing of publications. So if you have an existing publication, that's also visible on the data set. So they can also cite your papers as well. So it's kind of the typical attribution for scholarly works, and data fits right into that. And so that's kind of the main mechanism. But the other thing that oftentimes happens is that your people may reach out to you to want to collaborate with you, and this happens with data on FaceBase, that new collaborations will be formed around that. So someone will see your data and want to work on that, but they'll want to talk to you. Maybe you have additional measures that aren't available directly on the site, and strike up a new collaboration and work on some research and publications together. So I think those are the two that come to my mind as the primary ways that authorship and attribution to what you contribute through FaceBase are achieved.
Okay, this is pretty straightforward. So let's say we will be using some data from which we were able to get from FaceBase. Are we going to use citation that we use this data from FaceBase? Is FaceBase going to be also referred to in the literature or in references or not, or just original author?
Just the data are cited. So if you look at the example here, if I draw your attention under the data citation, so it's not so much FaceBase being cited, but the contributors of the data. So you'll see this is a real example, and it has 3 different contributors to this. None of those are FaceBase people. So it's all about just the original authors and producers of the data that are reflected in any citation.
Okay, but this is in this citation, you do have after the title of that research, FaceBase Consortium, right?
Right, and so we kind of act as in some sense as the publisher. So that's almost like we're like the venue for that, more so than that's not. So that's really how we fit into that. Is just we're like the publisher or the venue.
Okay, thank you.